Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is David Komlos. Grace Under Pressure, for those of you who know the show, focuses on the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment, and compassion we exert toward others. And grace for me is generosity, compassion, respect. And when you do it as a leader, as you will know from David, it's bringing people together for common cause and energizing them on a path forward. Welcome, David Komlos.
Hey, John. Good to be with you.
I want to tell folks all about you. You are CEO of Synergy, which is located in Toronto, and you've helped change the way many global leaders advance their top priorities. You worked with Fortune 15 companies as well as startups, and you talk about content creation and life-saving products. I'll get that. It's the life-saving that threw me up. You are also an early stage investor. So David, let's talk after the show.
Yeah.
You contribute to Forbes, and you've written for HBR, Wall Street Journal, and chief executive. And you speak widely on complexity, and that's where we met in Las Vegas almost 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So, David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John.
Great. So you're in the middle of it. You're in Toronto, and you just told me that another lockdown. What's the climate for business amongst the clients with whom you work? So
it varies. I work with organizations that are in resources, pharmaceuticals, financial services, retail, travel, and it really does vary. Some are booming, and they're hiring consulting firms literally for bodies. They just have so much work, and so much demand. Others are struggling, although the outlook is getting better. But some in travel, hospitality, aviation are really struggling. And the CEOs and CFOs are saying to me it's going to take a few years before things get back to normal, if they get things back to normal.
Right.
But the outlook is starting to brighten.
Oh, that's good. Good to know. So you focus on problems. So I guess you're always going to be in demand, David, because there are always problems. But you have some methodologies. What are the problems that you're seeing now, aside from our pandemic, or perhaps produced by our pandemic? So
the usual stuff, for sure, where organizations are merging and they're trying to stand up better post-merger integration, or they're trying to take cost out sustainably, or they're trying to figure out their growth strategies and so forth. But as a result of the pandemic, many of them now are really wrestling with challenges like diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're getting very, very serious about that challenge. They're getting very serious about work 2.0. Really, what is the future of work? How does that contribute? How does our strategy around the future of work contribute to attracting talent, retaining talent, and having a competitive edge, or just living up to our mandates?
Right.
And digitization, which preceded the pandemic for sure. People are doubling down, tripling down, quadrupling down on how to use digital opportunities to really continue to serve customers, deliver on their mandate, and differentiate.
Great. We've had a number of guests and executives such as yourself, and I do ask them what they're predicting or what they think will be at least the immediate future of work, the new normal. What are you seeing? So,
what I'm seeing is a range of optionality that CEOs are thinking through. Some feel that they want their employees back in the office or the offices 5 days a week. Mm-hmm. Some are talking about going completely remote, and some are talking hybrid. The trend that I see is hybrid. I see 2 days a week in the office, or 4 days a month in the office, some remote work, quite a bit of remote work.
Right. And that's what I'm hearing and working, and my clients say the same kind of thing. And so getting back to, you have a terrific book called, with an easy title, Cracking Complexity. Oh, sure.
Yeah, exactly.
So But cracking complexity, you make problem solving accessible. How so?
Yeah, I would say it boils down to the difference between having an approach and having a method or a formula.
Mm-hmm.
And by publishing the formula, we hoped to make it, my co-author and I, David Benjamin, hoped to make problem solving and wrestling with complexity and, innovating at scale and at pace more accessible by codifying the formula and being in a way that people can read about it and start to interpret it for themselves and have less of a vague, well-intentioned approach, but actually a step-by-step method that they can do on a repeatable basis. That's how I think you make problem solving accessible. And where my company's going is we're going from having done it for 20 years for organizations for a fee to now looking at how do we democratize our formula and create a platform where people can learn to do it for others, do it for themselves, bring it in-house, have all the tools in the workflow where the collaboration is built in to the work itself for solving complexity, for addressing complex challenges.
What a great thing. I mean, in other words, rather than hire a consulting firm, own the problem solving process yourself. All right.
Yes.
Great.
Exactly.
Great. So in your book, you've got a 10-step model, which is very detailed. One of the things that jumped out at me was step 4, localize the solvers. What do you mean by that? So,
yeah, traditionally we've meant get them in the same room, breathing the same air, and lock.
We don't want air now.
Exactly. And I would say very transparently that we were wrong about that. Now, when we wrote the book, which was in 2019, it was published. We'd been doing this for about 18 years at that point, bringing large groups of people together, 30, 40, 50 people all together in the same place to solve something really important and align around it. Right. And our view was you can't do that successfully with groups that are distributed. You have to bring them into one place. What we learned just prior to the pandemic, where we started innovating on our formula for video, and then what COVID forced us to do was pivot completely to transition our formula from assembled groups physically to remotely, is that the formula that we've got transitions nicely to video, and that you can actually have very deep dialogue with people. You can actually have water cooler informal dialogue with people that leads to insights, innovation, and you can do it in large groups where people are actually engaged, but you can't just hope for that kind of dynamic without engineering it.
I want to stop you on here because this is something that the pushback always comes when we talk about hybrid. Did I hear you say correctly that you can have water cooler conversations virtually?
Absolutely.
And so how does that happen?
Well, water cooler conversations, really, I think when we talk about water cooler conversations, we're talking about the serendipity, the happy accident of having bumped into someone who you didn't expect to bump into, and then having a very candid, nice, engaged, disarmed conversation where there's an exchange of information, there's an exchange of relationship. You can't have that over video unless you engineer that. But where the conventional wisdom is starting to emerge, which is incorrect, is people are starting to conclude that any more than 4 people on Zoom, Teams, or WebEx, and you're not going to have an authentic conversation. People are going to tune out, and that you can't include large groups of people, or you can't have serendipitous collisions with people. Well, if you set it up in a way where people are being invited to dialogue in a proactive way, informally and formally, and then you give them ways with which to go deep and get disarmed, you'll get them deep and disarmed, just like you would at the water cooler.
Oh, that's great. No, that is great. And one of the things I know that academic research showed that when people from, at least in academic research in the academic sector, talked about the water cooler, and it was the pollination of ideas from one group and sector to another. So essentially that's what you're doing. You're engineering a little bit through technology. Am I correct in that? So
that's right. Great. Using technology, tools, etc. to do that.
Great. Now you say that there's name of your book is I always get it wrong, cracking complexity. There's a difference, categorical difference between complex problems and complicated ones. Explain that, please.
Yeah, that's an important distinction, because each different type of problem category or challenge category needs a different kind of model for approaching it. The difference between complicated and complex problems is complicated problems are problems that are solved problems. And they might be difficult for the person who's experiencing them for the first time or who's not an expert, but they are solved problems. An example is, if your car breaks down, for most people, that's a complicated problem to fix a car. But it's a solved problem, and you take it to an expert known as a car mechanic, and that person fixes it for you in a very reliable way. If you're putting in a new accounting system, that's a complicated challenge, in that it may not be something that you're well versed in doing, but there's many consultants out there who do that 24/7, 365, and they can do it for you. Complex challenges are unsolved problems where they need to be solved fresh. Like, how do we grow faster? How do we improve DE&I in our organization? How do we drive gender parity, gender equity? How do we take cost out sustainably, merge better, lead in the customer experience? Those need to be figured out fresh each time. You can't just pull something off the shelf, copy what others have done, and hope for the same kinds of outcomes. The situations are very different, by organization and situation each time. So you need novel, fresh solutions, and you need people bought in to those solutions. That's the difference.
Great. I like the way that you're cracking complexity. It's to be expected that it would focus on scalability or agile issues, things like that. I like the way that you're applying it, as you said, beginning to the diversity, equity, and inclusion thing. How is that working?
Well, that is obviously an extremely high priority for many organizations and society at large. And we're just starting into that, working with leaders who are serious about DE&I and helping them really move from intent to action, and help them translate the knowledge and the information and the data that's out there about why DE&I matters and what people can do about it, to what does this really look like in our organization? How do we localize it? What are we going to invest in? How are we going to get everyone on the same page? And driving alignment and momentum around DE&I, which is a very, easy to want to improve kind of challenge, but harder to do, based on the need to galvanize large groups of people that have entrenched behaviors, entrenched mindsets, unconscious bias, and so forth. So to begin that kind of a very important and very delicate conversation is what we're doing. We're helping them do at scale.
So the methodology then gives people the tools or access into asking the right questions. Am I correct in that, David?
Yeah, asking the right questions, bringing the right types and diversity of talent to the table, people from different walks of life, different demographics, different lived experience, and different expertise and different influence in an organization to, really step into this, have the conversations they need to have, supported by expertise that we don't have, supported by real experts and people who know how to move the ball forward and can support them. But getting that alignment and getting that meeting of the minds is where we help.
I know one of the things essential to the work that you do, problem solving, is, we just touched on, is asking good questions. So you use questions as a starting point to solve.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question, John. So a good question in our mind has goal or goals embedded in the question that are explicit. There's a time frame that's a relevant time frame that's also explicit. And there's aspirations built into the question that would be viewed by those who are being asked to answer the question as aspirational, as a stretch target that's achievable, but only if things change. Mm-hmm. And so it's really important to use a good question to frame the challenge you're after, the priority you're looking to prosecute, the goals you're looking to achieve. It's really good to frame them as a starting point in the form of a question, which really serves as the invitation to a multiplayer, multi-stakeholder group of people to get mobilized in answering it.
Okay. Do you have examples of what you're speaking about? Like you call it the framing questions. Do you have, yeah.
Yeah. So if it's a growth question, an example might be, what must we do starting now and over the next 2 years to grow our business by 25% CAGR? And then you might add, while remaining a top employer of choice. Right? Or you might add
That's a complex question.
It is a complex question. It's not straightforward. That's right.
Yeah. No, but there's a lot of richness in there and things to delve into. That's part of the framing. So
that's right. That's right. In that example, there's a 2-year time frame. So you're not looking for recommendations necessarily that go beyond 2 years of what you can do. And you're looking for a certain type of growth metric, and you've got the constraint of like remaining a top employer of choice. That's all very deliberate. So for your audience, it's very, very important to really craft these questions, wordsmith them very carefully so that they serve as a really robust invitation that doesn't also include answers in the question, which biases the outcomes.
That's very important. So I'm going to just, because you talked about framing the question, and so I'm going to guess that you do research before you even frame those questions. Am I correct in that? To get to know the client or the customer?
Yeah, we work very closely with the customer to understand desired outcomes and context and so forth, and help them phrase the right question for themselves.
Speaking cynically, that's almost the old joke about consultants is, what the time do you have your watch or whatever? What am I here to do? I'm here to ask you questions, but I don't have the questions. You have the questions.
Right, that's right. And it would have been watches, but we gave away all our watches, and so we went to questions next.
That's a good one. So, but it's actually a participative process, and that's the way you begin to create the buy-in and the ownership. Am I correct in that? So
that's exactly right. Yeah, they start to co-create themselves.
And so you have migrated your platform, and you said, when I said localize, you're doing it really via video and doing it that way. Anything you have learned in the past year, Zoom-wise, for bringing people to actually open up? Or is that an issue or something else that you've learned? So
it is an issue, but the good news is people crave authentic dialogue with each other, whether they're face-to-face in the same place or whether they're over Zoom, Teams, or WebEx, or Google Meet for that matter. And so there's an inclination to connect human to human. It's just, how do you do that? And what we find is we start with a question. People have a goal in mind. They understand why they've been brought together, and we don't just let them have at it. We use lots of different features in these video conferencing tools now that are very useful. There's voting mechanisms. There's the ability to break out into smaller teams. There's the ability to chat. There's the ability to whiteboard. And the way in which we combine it using our formula in a step-by-step way allows these people to go from this question to brainstorming solutions, ideating on what's possible, to critiquing one another, and arriving at really good conclusions.
I'm going to say, because I'm hearing a little bit of this from some of my colleagues, and while we all want human connection and stuff, do you think there are some efficacies in video, because you were delineating the ideas about chat and whiteboarding and things like that, that are more effective on video than in person? Are you finding that, or am I hallucinating? So
that's a good question. I think people, that's a really good question.
I have found where it came from is a colleague of mine who does mega keynotes and stuff. Mm-hmm. And she found using a chat function gave her a sense of intimacy with a larger audience. And so that was a learning that she had not expected, nor had I. And so that's why I'm putting you on the spot and and throwing it to you.
Yeah, the big surprise for us was we felt that, as I said, you have to bring groups of people together physically. Now that they're on video, we felt there might be a dilution of togetherness and cohesion, because we're not doing this 3 days in a row. We're doing it interspersed meetings over the course of, let's say, 10 days. We thought there'd be a dilution of attention, of focus, and momentum. In fact, there's the opposite. That's been the surprise for us. And we've actually been able to inject new expertise in between meetings, new data, new people. We've got a new way to tap into an advisory board feature that allows people to weigh in who are not participating in the full sprint online. That's been the big eye opener for us. Otherwise, we just have really robust ways with which to get people engaged that seem to work over video as well.
Yeah, we've always thought of, the intense 2-day breakout or offsites. Okay. And, people come up charged and solving problems and stuff. Spreading that over 10 days, as you had said, at a glance is things, okay. But the way you're peppering it or spicing it up, as you say, or I say, adding experts to it or different dimensions, that's pretty cool. So
it's been neat. And I would say one thing too, John, is, 2-day workshops, 3-day workshops. I don't know, the jury's out because we haven't experienced whether we're going to go back to that. But I would say that going forward, getting back to your original question around new work models, I do believe groups of people will travel to a physical location to be together for 3 days. I just don't know that they're going to workshop for 2 or 3 days. I think that with remote work being much more, contemporary and popular, people will travel, but they'll want to spend time gelling as a team. They'll want to spend time, hanging around with each other as opposed to just solving business problems.
Great. Now, a key concept to you in cracking complexity is a word you use, and it's collision. Tell us about a collision. What's a collision?
Well, an interaction is a conversation that, might be nice, might be intense, and so forth. A collision is an intense, candid, short, back and forth, quick exchange with someone in a very disarmed way. And it takes many, many of those collisions to be done in high volume and high speed, a lot of iteration back and forth in micro bursts between large groups of people that really over time, over 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, can really yield incredible insight and get months and months of work done. Mm-hmm. Work that would take normally very long if you have these intense back and forth structured conversations. That's what collisions are.
A structured conversation. Now, when you call it a structured conversation, do you give a methodology for that conversation and it changes over the course of a workshop?
The way we like to structure things is we like to take a large group of, let's say, 15 to 50 individuals, divide them into teams that are talking about different topics in service of answering a big question. And we don't just let them break out on those teams. We assign them as members, critics, and observers. Members own the topics on which they're members, and their job is to really advance the content as far as possible. Critics are listening very carefully, providing critique to what the members are saying. Their job is to really help the members advance their conversation as far as possible, again, in service of answering that big question that you've started with. Observers are only listening, which is a very useful, very frustrating job. But because we assign people as members, critics, and observers equally, everyone gets a chance to really talk, and it's very much a controlled explosion of interest and engagement using those roles. We iterate on the topic several times. So you go from sort of what is going on to what could we make happen to what will we do.
Right. And I think what you're getting to is your point number 9, which is changing the way people interact. And that's simple, but boy, that's hard. So what you just explained is there something more than what you just explained about the observer, the critic, and the doer, questioner?
Just what you're saying, like it sounds difficult, but it actually is quite straightforward. We find that people take these roles on very naturally. And because you distribute these roles in a fair way where everyone's going to play those different roles, the members are looking for critique from the critics, and the observers are just dying to get in. But then when that meeting ends and they go off to another meeting to be a member or a critic, it's very, very useful. So it is a very powerful way to get people listening and contributing differently.
Okay. So one of the things is the key concept in any successful organization is the level of engagement. And so What do you do to engage the best and the brightest around these complex problems?
I think the trick is,
excuse me. You can talk. I'll take myself off here.
I think the trick is really to put people at the center of solving, make them the star attraction. That's really the gist of it. It's about bringing the right variety of people together and really making it clear that you've got this special purpose group that you've brought together, whether in person or over video, who are there to solve a big question that they all care about. They might have differing views about, but that they are at the center of solving, as opposed to outsourcing the solving to consultants or experts. We say bring in the consultants and experts and stakeholders and advisors and partners, and have them collide with the people who've got the native intelligence of what's going on in their organization.
And I think that's thank you. I think that's such an important point, because when you look at your role as the outsider, if I can interpolate, you're giving the methodology, the approach, the technique, and the tools. It's the people in the organization who are solving the issues for themselves. Am I correct? So.
Yeah, they are, and they're supported by a handful of external parties if there's a gap in knowledge or data or information.
Great. So we are coming toward the end of our program, and I like to ask every guest a story of grace. So you have, I know, something to share, David. So please.
The story of grace that I have is just all about my colleagues at Syntegrity, which, during the pandemic, we had to pivot. We had to take on so much in such a short time to survive, never mind thrive. And my colleagues showed such empathy and patience, and yet drive and leadership and followership that was incredibly inspiring and had very little to do with me. It was just incredible.
That's a wonderful story. I like the way you have turned the grace into many others have done for you and for the company. That's a good story. So building on that, as we think about the future of work, and so are problems going to be easier, more complicated, more complex, or what? So all of the above. So.
I think we'll have, the world has exponential complexity. Nothing's changed with that. You'll have your fair share of simple problems, complicated problems, complex problems. I think that we have huge opportunities and a few hurdles in how we address all those categories of problems now that we are changing the way in which we work. And technology has such a central, focus in our lives. So it's not the proliferation of complexity any more than it has been, but it's the way in which we power up in the face of it that is going to be the big opportunity and the big hurdle of our era.
That's great. David, you've been a great guest. How can people find you? So
you've been a great partner here. They can go to syntegritygroup.com. They can go to crackingcomplexity.com.
Great. We will put those links in the notes for the video. David, I appreciate you spending time with me today and solving the cracking complexity. Thank you. So.